So another big topic that's come out recently is that our friends over at the giant Google have made some tweaks to their page speed insight scores, which plays a huge role in a company's effectiveness to get good SEO, to get value out of their AdWords, and really just online advertising across the board. So I'll definitely turn it over to Nick and Rob here. What are some of the takeaways you're seeing from the adjustments they've made, and how would you recommend moving forward for current e-commerce companies?
So one real quick thing for individuals that might be hearing about this that don't really know what it is. It is one of the factors that you mentioned. It impacts SEO. So it's one of the factors that Google uses for its gigantic algorithm to determine people's organic search rankings. And it just so happens to be kind of one of the de facto tools that everyone uses to determine if a page is fast or not. Page speed is always talked, Google Pagespeed is always kind of talked about as if like it's this thing that's never changed. And what it actually is it's just a couple different metrics that Google uses to determine and measure your site and determine a number to say if it's fast or not fast. Right now, they just made a change this year to now their 6th version of what they actually measure to determine how they determine your page and if it's fast according to them. So people may have heard about this in the past and been like, oh yeah, I know, I've run that through there. It tells me I need to use a couple different things and this and that, but it's really evolved over time. And so a lot of the best practices and a lot of the tips and tricks and tools that people in the development world used to use to get good page speed scores historically just don't really translate to automatically getting a good Google page speed score anymore with this latest round of changes that they've made. There's 3 real main key areas that are going to have the biggest area of impact for your site and how Google considers your site to be performing. The first one is this concept of largest content paint. So what that means is how quickly are you delivering the largest piece of content on that page to the user? And that's 25% of your score right there. So you could have a really fast page that loads, but you have a banner image on your own page that doesn't load for 6 seconds. Google says that that page is slow because that largest piece of content took 6 seconds to load. The other big item is this concept of blocking time. So basically, how much time is your code causing the browser to sit there and wait before it can actually render the page to the user? That's another 25% of the score. So just those 2 things combined is 50% of how Google judges how fast your page is. In the e-commerce world, a lot of us are working within e-commerce platforms. So what that means is that we're starting off with Magento or Salesforce Commerce or BigCommerce, any of these platforms. It's a big chunk of code with a lot of code that's just standard. So what that means is there's a lot of things that you might need to get loaded in the browser right away and use, and there's a lot of things that you might not need to use. So that's where it takes time and effort for the e-commerce agency or the development partner to really go through and determine, is this actually needed? Sure, we're not using that functionality, but actually, even though we're not using that functionality, your underlying e-commerce platform might still be sending it to the user and slowing down the page. So that's where you have to be very careful and very specific about focusing on taking almost an artisanal kind of like approach or surgical approach to really analyzing, cool, I got all this stuff out of the box from the platform. Now let's actually go through and start weeding stuff out that we don't need. Because just leaving it in but not using it is actually going to have a negative impact on your page speed.
I think it's also worth noting too that from a marketing and a speed standpoint, as much as you can try to get your third-party marketing tools offloaded over to Google Tag Manager. That's usually a nice little way of saying, hey, you know, Google, I want to use this thing. I find value in this thing. I also don't want to be docked for this thing, so you're going to take care of this thing. So not only does that take some of the burden off your developers, it also allows your marketers to get a little bit more hands-on with some of the content and tools on your site. And so if you haven't looked into Google Tag Manager, I certainly would recommend doing that. I think it can only be a benefit for merchants out there.
So Rob, can you expound a little bit more on that? What really is Google Tag Manager from a high level, and how does it help marketers?
Sure. So Google Tag Manager is a system that allows you to implement various third-party services, pixels, JavaScript. Let's say if I'm doing A/B split testing, if I'm using a service like Hotjar for heat mapping, or even Google Analytics, right? It's a container that allows me to say, hey, I want this application, this bit of code, this pixel, this whatever to only show up if this condition exists, right? I think that's a good way to possibly explain it. But one example is, okay, I can have Google Analytics load up on all my e-commerce pages, right? I want Google Analytics is its own thing, but Google Analytics is applied to my site via Google Tag Manager. So it's almost like, here's all my third-party applications here. Here's my website. Google Tag Manager kind of facilitates putting these on your page for the end user. And that's probably because Google thinks it's a faster way of doing it and they can sort of handle things. There's also another component where, from a GDPR standpoint, Google kind of takes on some of that burden for you. If you're concerned about GDPR compliance and things like that, you don't have to worry about, because Google's kind of your legal representative, if you will, between you and the outside world. So that's kind of nice and probably a bad thing to say. But it serves as that middle piece.
It's a good way to allow. There's always a little bit of this give and take and back and forth with e-commerce marketing team and their actual development team for, hey, I'd love to get this kind of tracking. I'd like to put this kind of marketing piece in, and then the IT team or the development team's like, okay, cool, let me go and do that, and then we're gonna have to schedule a deployment of new code and have to, you know, a great positive thing there about Tag Manager is that it is separate from your actual e-commerce code, so you don't have to be going through all the red tape that the e-commerce developer or the IT team puts up around releasing of new code. So you as a marketing team can kind of be empowered to be like, oh, okay, I want to try out this new marketing tracker, or implement Hotjar to start getting some screen recordings of how users are interacting with our site. You can do that within Tag Manager and publish that new container that they call it without ever needing to talk with and deal with any kind of red tape with your IT team.
Right, and if you mess up, it makes it very easy to roll it back. Yep. As well. So I know a lot of people that may be reading this, they may use a service like AdRoll, which is a remarketing platform, right? You know, there may have to be all sorts of planning phases and things that you may have to put into place, you know, for rolling out new code. And well, okay, maybe I roll out AdRoll via Google Tag Manager. I just hit a nice little submit button, something's messed up. Okay, I can pull that back without having to plan again and figure out a way to roll back some code. So it kind of protects your marketer as well. And you can be a little bit more haphazard than a typical developer if you're using Google Tag Manager, and feel safe.
And to kind of have that roll back into the Google Pagespeed aspect of it by getting all those additional marketing trackers, scripts, and things within a Google Tag Manager container. You can set that stuff to be a little bit more deprioritized and control at what point it gets loaded into the browser. So that way you don't have all of these marketing items coming up and getting called in and loaded in first, which then delays all of the really critical items that are needed for the actual page to be rendered by the browser. So it's a nice way to kind of collect all that stuff and get that stuff loaded in towards the end of the page, as opposed to just hoping that your IT team or somebody paid attention to loading priorities and didn't inadvertently impact how Google rates your page for loading.
Right. So it sounds like Google Tag Manager, awesome for marketers who want to try new things without having to knock on IT's door or their agency's door every time they want to. But could you just quickly, how difficult is it to install Google Tag Manager? Because obviously that needs to be done before you can receive these benefits of it.
Very easy. So depending on what you're using, Google will give you just a script snippet of code that just needs to be included on globally on your website. A lot of the e-commerce platforms just support it out of box, and all you have to do is then just in the back end controls and configurations of your e-commerce platform, just put in a unique code that is for that tag manager container that we've been referencing. So some might be supported out of the box. I believe Magento open source does not, but Magento Commerce supports tag manager out of box.
Awesome. Anything else, guys, on the new Google updates or how we'd recommend moving forward there?
It would be really taking a look at it, running your site through PageSpeed insights to see how Google's now viewing your website and the performance of your website through these new metrics that they've pulled together, and just working with your development team or your e-commerce team to really kind of take a look at these new ways that Google's decided to view your site, and come up with some new creative solutions for it, because it's a weighted score, and like I said at the beginning of this topic, it's the 6th iteration of this. So we'll all start to get really good at the new way that Google's going to start to rate it, and then who knows, in a year or two they'll make some tweaks and some adjustments, because I think, as we've all kind of noticed over the past couple of years, Google's realized that they're in the position to just start pulling everybody forward on the web to try and make the web better and faster in their viewpoint. So it's not, with the way that they've restructured these metrics, it's not a quick flip of the switch. For a lot of these e-commerce platforms, like I said, there's just a lot of stuff in there. And it requires someone to really take a look at how this metric is pulled together by Google and really coming to a creative solution to get a good score on each of these metrics.
Cool. And I would just say, for one final word, speaking more to the marketers and people who are, maintaining this on their own, if you go to Google PageSpeed Insights and you type your site in and you get some low scores and you see a bunch of red, it's also not time to panic. You don't need an entire new website. Again, a lot of times it can be a couple tweaks, optimizing a few images here and there, making the homepage a little bit easier to see on mobile, and that can quickly bring those scores up. So, at that point, reach out to your internal team, reach out to your agency, and again, it's no time to panic.
It's also worth noting that don't obsess over the score. It's more worth obsessing over relative change of the score, right? It's not so much that my score is 40, it's that, okay, now it's 40, maybe I can make it 45. Maybe I can make it 50, right? Like, we just want that direction is very important of improvement.
So just a perfect example of don't obsess over it, just use it as a guiding factor to just continually drive improvement. Nike is at a 15. You know, like you've got these large gigantic brands. Sure, I mean, I get it, that's a catch-22 of like, that's great, it's Nike, they don't have to worry about SEO, maybe, is your reaction. But you've even got these large brands with these massive budgets to maintain a website that are also getting caught by these new ways that Google's starting to reframe how they rate a page. So it's not like you're left out in the dark and you're behind everybody else.